folks. Dyroff here, CEO of The Street Sheet. I'm speaking with Adam Mesh today. Adam, give me a little bit of a background about who you are, and then I want to jump into your thoughts on the markets.
Sure. Adam Mesh, been trading for over 20 years. Started out as a day trader, moved into swing trading, got involved in options in 2014, and pretty much 100 trades a day. That's the fun part, but also manage portfolios and stuff like that.
Okay, and you got to tell me the 60-second snippet of your reality TV experience.
I was an owner of a trading firm, and my job was to train new traders. And a friend sent along a message saying, who wants to be on a show called Life of the Party? I said, I'll go do it because the market was slow at the time. I went on not knowing that it was a dating show. And it was average guys going for Miss Missouri. And when it got to the final three, they brought in 3 male underwear models. And in the finale, which was watched by 30 million people, it was me versus the underwear model. Now, as it relates to this, they came back to New York. They went into my apartment and they saw I had been featured in Fortune magazine for my trading success. And all of a sudden, the producers were like, whoa, what do you do for a living? Because they never asked me. And are you a millionaire? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh my God. So they started plugging that up. So what happened was after... Thank you. So what happened was after NBC did this whole thing, I got thousands of letters asking for help in the stock market. And then, by the way, I lost on the first show. There's a great video of thousands of people watching, and you can't tell what's happening, but I lost. NBC gave me my own show, which was called Adam Returns. And on that show, there was an episode sponsored by Schwab where I would teach all the girls that were pursuing me how to trade. So it was a great episode. All the girls, and I was going around showing them how to trade, and the winner got to go on a date with me. So that was the fun part of it, but it gave me a lot of exposure where people wanted to learn from me and they felt comfortable with who I was in the market. And that kind of took me from the private training professionals how to trade to training the public how to trade, which I did for years.
Such a good story. I love that. Okay. So let's get into, maybe some commentary on what actually might help some of my audience, your audience. And I want to start high level. I think when I look at the market right now, one of the questions I'm curious about when I talk to people like you is very simply, are you a bull or are you a bear right now? And I think like you could, on what sector, on what stock, like if I just look at the S&P 500, this kind of quote unquote bet on America, and I know the S&P is like, has a weighting discussion going on with it. But if we look at the S&P 500 and you want to quote unquote bet on that, are you bullish or bearish on the market in general right now, that being a proxy?
I evaluate the market and my feelings towards the market on a daily basis. And it's what I do for a living. My whole alpha in work is the markets, being involved, having an opinion. That's just what I'm expected to do, which is a slippery slope because it could change often. But I've learned to really be a little bit more stubborn and longer term with my views. And that's how I approach every trade, with the top-down approach. I look at the market and then I decide whether I want to get involved or not. And it's been a great year. The Qs hit I think it was 637. I watch the Qs, it's the same thing as the NASDAQ or any other indicator. For me, it's just the Qs because easiest number to remember. It's a little smaller than the NASDAQ thousands. So 637 was the high. And me and my community in discussions felt like we had topped off for the year, that we weren't hitting new highs again for the year. So for the last 6 weeks, that's how I've been playing it. I am not buying rallies, not necessarily buying dips either. Also very afraid to short this market. So right now I'm in a portfolio where there's a lot of just premium collection through options. And I'm very comfortable with the market just kind of being a little stagnant right now. So my expectation that I could give you for year end is that the highs are in. We're not going higher. We can move around, but that there's a bigger risk to the downside.
Super interesting. And then, staying with this kind of 30,000 foot macro view, what's the one or maybe two macro factors that you're watching most closely that could impact the market? Inflation, interest rates, geopolitical tension. What do you have on your mind?
So I mean, political tensions have been tested. I mean, between Russia and Ukraine and us invading Iran and Venezuela, we don't budge. The market does not budge on those on geo geopolicy. Internal, we had was it the longest shutdown of the government ever? I remember a couple of years ago that they would vote on a shutdown and the futures would be moving wildly. Again, it didn't really impact the market. So for me, like what could really move the market is a Bitcoin collapse. That's for me is what I watch, and I've seen that's been, I think, the most notable change of the last couple of months is that where Bitcoin kind of tended to move with the markets, I actually think it's now leading the markets a little bit. And if you have a big Bitcoin sell off, it will lead to a market sell off. And the reason is because there's so many of these funds that popped up. MSTR was the first, but like even MSTR was the first, and there you have these leveraged crypto plays, and there's a lot of companies that have been doing it, and they've been buying Bitcoin. And if you get forced liquidation from that crypto community, which has been made rich, and then they have to sell other things, I think that's the number one risk to the market.
Super interesting. I actually haven't heard that. We could probably even talk for hours on this subject specifically. I'll try to keep it tight. My
And
thought
by the
was,
way, and let me just say before you finish, I'm not saying I'm a Bitcoin bear.
yeah,
I'm just saying for me, that's like the scary scenario where the market comes unwound.
interesting. I was gonna go down the path of originally when I started learning about crypto and Bitcoin, I thought, or at least it was positioned to me as something that was very uncorrelated to the markets. And I think over the past, like, call it 5 years, it felt very in sync with the markets, right? And so actually this is the first time that I've heard it maybe being somewhat of a leading indicator and out of sync potentially for a bad reason. If it on the flip side of the coin, if all of a sudden Bitcoin goes to 125 before the end of the year, do you think that's a good thing for the markets?
It would be a bullish event
Gotcha.
for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be a bullish event, and I think stocks would trade higher on that. Yeah,
Okay.
and vice versa. If you had like a crypto winter and Bitcoin dropped from 90,000 to 60,000, I think we would have serious damage to the market. And
Interesting.
I do think the Bitcoin would trigger that market sell off.
Super interesting. This is, in my mind, somewhat adjacent to the crypto conversation, and I feel like it's a point of discussion I have with my buddies all the time. You saw, I think it was Howard Marks, right last week. Is it a bubble? And he's talking about AI, and so that's on everybody's mind. And you think about the markets, you think about crypto. I think AI is in that conversation as well. Do you think that we are in an AI bubble?
No. I think just like, the internet bubble and everything else we've seen along the way, there's going to be the haves and the have nots. That's always the case, winners and losers. Um, kind of interesting because OpenAI isn't even public right now, so the leader is not even a public stock for those purposes. But in terms of its use case, I think we have just scratched the surface. I use it every day, and I'm older. Like I can't imagine what my kids are going to be able to do with it. Like we're just becoming more efficient humans when it's used correctly. And I mean, it's not even mobile yet. And that's going to be the next thing, is that it's going to come with you. Like I imagine a future where your AI assistant is like sitting there somehow listening to you at dinner, and you're like, oh, that reminds me, I gotta make a doctor appointment next week. And then it reminds you later, hey, you said you wanted at dinner, you wanted to make a doctor's appointment. You still want to do that? Like it's going to be I don't know. I mean, I'm I'm not scared for that AI future. I think it's just it's the same thing as the ability to talk to someone in another country just by dialing a phone. Like how magical must that have seemed at the time? And so now it's just for me, AI is like you think it and it happens. It's like it's incredible, and so I'm excited for the future of that, and I think it's gonna make everything more efficient.
I agree with you, and I think the use case is remarkable. What the future could be is even harder to dream up right now because the sky is the limit. But when we come back down to earth for just a second, I kind of feel like we're going to go through a rough patch. And like, again, a lot of debate is focused on the winners that you said, maybe an Nvidia being one of them. And like, even if Nvidia has a blowout quarter, if they miss expectations, right? There's sometimes this perception that it will sell off. And if it sells off, any other names related to it will. And then because there's such a concentration in that space, like the larger market will sell off as well. So I don't know if you agree with that. And I'd also be interested to hear, like, do you have any specific thoughts on Nvidia? What's the maybe biggest risk to that company, and like specifically missing guidance, right, which could trigger this potentially? And because I don't consider myself an expert, but from what I read, there's like Google's making a lot of good strides when it comes to uh, this chip space. It's still very hard to do what Nvidia does as well. So there's a little noise even on my end where I'm trying to find that signal. I think a lot of people are. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts around, that specific kind of subsector, that stock. It's been such a hot name this year.
So for me, when I first started trading, like I had my own retirement plan there, and you were allowed to do whatever you wanted with it. I guess the rules were different then, because now this would be that. But I remember at the time, I put all my money into AOL, which was what we used for email and what you use for IMing, and it was just that was the only thing there was. And my money quadrupled. I was the 401k king. And then the scenario that I couldn't imagine unfolded, in which AOL became completely obsolete. And my 401k, I gave back everything and lost. And it was like a big lesson to me. So, yeah, I don't think I'm smart enough to imagine how that transition happens, but I never put it past who we are as a country and always looking to better the rest, that there couldn't be a competition or even just like a price war where there's someone good enough that matches it. And it will take time to break in. They dominate the market, but I learned that lesson with AOL. Like if you were my age at the time, AOL was everything, and you couldn't imagine that not being the case. And so, can I imagine Nvidia not being the dominant player that it is? No, I can't. But would I invest as if that couldn't happen? No, I wouldn't.
Makes sense. I think we even saw a little bit of that with like the DeepSeek moment earlier this year, not specifically related to chips per se, but DeepSeek coming out and the investment community being like, holy cow, if they can do this, for much cheaper than OpenAI can, what does that mean for that valuation, etc. I think we can kind of continue on with a couple final questions. If you had to make a major prediction for 2026, I like the Bitcoin commentary already, but we're sitting here next year, and if you could make a huge prediction for 2026, what would it be?
It's interesting, I wish we would have had this conversation a year ago, because I was documented and early on, too early with quantum and nuclear, but that was just through conversations I had, and quantum happened much faster than I thought. So I could go kind of sector by sector. I think we heard quantum's 15 years away, and then it started trading like it was here. I don't think quantum's going to explode over the next year. I think that will be in a holding pattern for a while, because it will take a little time to come in. And so, when people ask me about Rigetti and the qubits and those stocks, which were really good this year, I'm not looking to do more with those. I have some positions, but I'm certainly not buying more. Nuclear and how that plays out and seeing winners, that had a big run up. Could that be continued? I could see that. All these moves have been made, but it's just being set up now. So what happens? Is it efficient, and is nuclear the new form of energy? If so, that could have another leg up that I'd like to keep an eye on. AI too, it wouldn't be surprised for it to be in a holding pattern. We haven't had a down market in When? Since when? I don't know. When was the last time we closed down on the year? Um,
It might have been 2022 for the S&P 500 when rates started to like skyrocket. Yeah,
yeah.
because that's when Powell decided to go on a tear with the interest rate increase, and it makes sense, right? Especially for the Nasdaq with growth stocks too.
Yeah, so there's been so much that happened with quantum, nuclear, AI. Everything keeps changing, and what's going to come. I don't know. Tesla will be really interesting with the robotics plays too, and how robots, if you start combining, I think that's kind of what I guess maybe where you could combine what I said earlier, where AI meets mobile. If you have AI incorporated into these robots, then I think the robotics plays still that could get interesting as like I'm always thinking about like what sector can explode. Like for me, I like the normal positions are set on the side. I'm looking for the Palantir move from the 20 to over 100, like Robin Hood, that kind of move. Those things that like go parabolic. What's the next one? SoFi from $4 to 28. Like, so I'm always thinking in terms of where those could be, and the is interesting there for me.
The quantum comment was really interesting because I only have a surface level knowledge of that space, and I would say even the crypto space. But if there's one big threat to like a Bitcoin for me, it might be some of these supercomputers that can crack that code, right? And does
Right.
it make it worthless? That's been interesting, and I want to go down a rabbit hole there. And I agree with you on maybe connected artificial intelligence. And like the other thing that Musk has is Neuralink too. So like, okay, can we, and we probably already are, uh, input Grok into Optimus, which I think is already happening, and these robots are actually becoming kind of sentient and aware. The next step would be, can you put Grok into Neuralink and put that into your mind, and now you're all knowing, right? And I don't think that's next year, but I agree with you. There's some really interesting stuff on the horizon. My final question is: you walk into 7-Eleven, you get a lottery ticket, you win $1 million. Which stock are you putting that $1 million on over for the next 12 months?
So you have to understand my whole personality is not doing that based on the
I know,
KOL story I told earlier.
I know,
But
and I believe me, I would never do that personally either. It's more of a thought
no, I
exercise.
know. I don't know. This is an interesting question.
It could be an ETF. It could be a trend or a sector as well. It could be a theme.
I don't know why I'm struggling so much. Like I could say I have a list of behind our screen right now while we're talking. I have so many stocks in front of me. I could say any of them, but I like to answer that with like so for this year it would have been right. It's come back a little bit now, but it wouldn't have been the best stock. But I was very bullish on Uber this year,
Okay.
and we were involved like in the 70s, 60s, 70s. Is that even right? Because I knew I had the 75 calls, which were out of the money. Let me just look at that 52-week. Um, so Uber was for 2025, just because of everything they had their hand in. Yeah, so we were involved high 60s, low 70s. It made that move to 100. Now it's come back into the 80s, but it was a stock I would buy comfortably. SoFi was another one that I was involved in big time. I do still think that Uber. I would probably say Uber still. It's hard. That's what I always like to say. I still think Uber is going to have a parabolic move,
Yeah.
um, but it hasn't happened, and lately it's looked weak. So like, I don't want to say it right now because I wouldn't even buy it right now.
Yeah.
But it has to figure out. But between the food delivery and the ride share and getting into autonomous driving and having been first to market with Uber, like that's still the verb. I think they have so many different ways to win that it's interesting. So that's one that I can't imagine that this isn't $150 stock in the next couple of years. So Uber.
Love that thesis because I agree with everything that you said in terms of like just what they have, right? Like their foundation now, and they're operating in a space that seems like a duopoly between them and Lyft. And I have one of my best buddies who is number 4 at Lyft, so I keep trying to use it, but my fingers always go to Uber, and that tells you something, right?
Right.
So, yeah, that's a great one to end on. I think that's it. I'd love to do more of these,
Yeah.
and I think we will. Any final kind of thoughts before we wrap up here?
No, I think the only thing I think what we could touch on in a future conversation is uh, the way I use options around everything I'm doing. Like you're a nice guy, I'm a nice guy, but when it comes to options, I'm just ruthless with premium collection. I just grab it, I take it, I get it wherever I can, and I really like when I get involved in stocks. I'm like, your the cost basis is going to be zero. I'm not going to stop until I have a zero cost basis, and we could have some fun conversations about how I do that.
Let's please do that. I had written that down, but my goal is to try to keep this
Yeah,
conversation in less than 30 minutes. So that's a perfect tee up for the next call. And I'll even end with the fact that I have never traded options, and so walking through this with you as a noob, a rook for our audience would be great.
all right.
Awesome. Alrighty, I'm gonna hop, and we will chat soon.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, see ya.